My 11-year-old got expelled for hacking, and the school district hired her for cybersecurity. The school resource officer was reading my daughter her rights when I walked into the administrative office, and for a moment, I genuinely believed I had entered the wrong building. Mia sat in a plastic chair designed for someone twice her size, her feet dangling 3 inches above the carpet, her hands folded primly in her lap, like she was waiting for a piano recital to begin. She was wearing her favorite purple cardigan with the mismatched buttons, the one my late wife had sewn for her 2 years before she passed, and her expression was so calm, it bordered on eerie. Officer Dennis Carver, a man I recognized from neighborhood watch meetings, stood over my 11-year-old with a laminated Miranda card in his hand, stumbling over the words like he had never had to recite them to a child before. Principal Deborah Whitmore sat behind her desk, with her fingers steepled, watching the scene unfold with the detached satisfaction of someone who had already decided how this story would end. I demanded to know what was happening, and every adult in the room turned to look at me with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. That was the moment I realized my daughter, who weighed 73 pounds and still slept with a stuffed elephant named Professor Whiskers, was being treated like a criminal. I had been working as a network engineer for Consolidated Medical Systems for 14 years when I got the call that Thursday afternoon, designing and maintaining the digital infrastructure that kept 3 regional hospitals running smoothly. My specialty was cybersecurity, specifically protecting patient data from the kind of attacks that were becoming increasingly sophisticated every year. The irony of what was happening to my daughter would not become apparent until much later, but in that moment, all I could process was the disconnect between Mia's gentle nature and the accusations being leveled against her. She was the kind of kid who apologized to furniture when she bumped into it, who rescued earthworms from sidewalks after rainstorms, who had cried for 3 days when her goldfish died, despite my assurances that Mr. Bubbles had lived a full and meaningful life. She had started coding when she was 7, because she wanted to make a video game where you could adopt abandoned cats, and her technical skills had grown exponentially since then, but she had never shown any interest in using them for harm. Mia looked up at me when I entered, and the trust in her eyes nearly broke me because I had no idea if I could actually help her. Principal Whitmore explained the situation with the clipped efficiency of someone reading from a prepared script, her words landing like hammer blows against my increasingly fragile composure. According to her account, Mia had been caught accessing the school district's secure administrative network without authorization, downloading confidential files, and potentially compromising the personal information of thousands of students, parents, and staff members. The district's IT consultant, a man named Gerald Frost, who I would come to despise with every fiber of my being, had discovered the breach during a routine security audit and traced the intrusion back to a school-issued laptop assigned to my daughter. The evidence, Principal Whitmore assured me, was irrefutable. Log files showed unauthorized access originating from Mia's device during school hours. Screenshots captured her logged into administrative panels she had no business viewing. The district was pursuing immediate expulsion and had already contacted law enforcement to determine if criminal charges were warranted. I listened to all of this while my hands developed a tremor I could not control, and when she finished, I asked the only question that mattered. Had anyone bothered to ask Mia what actually happened? The silence that followed my question told me everything I needed to know about how thoroughly the adults in this room had failed my daughter. Principal Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval, as if the suggestion that an 11-year-old might have an explanation for her actions was somehow offensive to her professional sensibilities. Officer Carver shifted uncomfortably, clearly wishing he was anywhere else, dealing with literally any other situation that did not involve arresting a child who looked like she should be selling Girl Scout cookies. I turned to Mia and asked her directly, in front of everyone, to tell me what happened. She looked at Principal Whitmore first, as if asking permission to speak, and when no objection came, she took a deep breath and began explaining in her small, precise voice. She said she had found something bad on the school computers, and she had been trying to tell someone, but nobody would listen. When I asked what she had found, her eyes filled with tears for the first time since I had arrived. She said someone was stealing money, Dad, and they were using the lunch program to do it. The room went very quiet after Mia's accusation, and I watched Principal Whitmore's expression cycle through several emotions before settling on condescending dismissal. She suggested that Mia was clearly trying to deflect from her own criminal behavior by making wild accusations against the district, a common tactic among young people who had been caught doing something wrong. Gerald Frost, who had been lurking in the corner like a malevolent toad, nodded vigorously and added that the security breach was sophisticated enough to suggest premeditation, not the actions of a child stumbling across inconvenient information. I asked if anyone had actually investigated Mia's claims, and the uncomfortable silence that followed confirmed they had not. Officer Carver cleared his throat and said that without specific evidence of financial impropriety, there was nothing he could do about alleged embezzlement, but there was plenty of evidence supporting the unauthorized access charges. I felt my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached, and I told them we were leaving. Principal Whitmore informed me that Mia was suspended pending the formal expulsion hearing, which would take place the following week, and that I should expect to hear from the district's legal counsel regarding potential civil liability for the data breach. We drove home in silence for the first 15 minutes, Mia staring out the window with an expression far too world-weary for someone who had not yet started middle school. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, trying to reconcile the criminal mastermind the school had described with the little girl who still asked me to check her closet for monsters at bedtime. When we stopped at a red light, I asked her to start from the beginning and tell me everything, promising that I would believe her no matter what she said. The story that emerged over the next hour, told in fragments between tears and frustrated outbursts, was far more complex and disturbing than anything I had imagined. Mia explained that it had started 3 weeks earlier when she noticed something strange about the school lunch system while helping her friend Olivia troubleshoot a payment error. The digital platform the district used to manage cafeteria transactions had a vulnerability she had spotted almost immediately, a backdoor that allowed administrative access through a sequence of inputs that should have been impossible. She had reported it to her computer science teacher, Mr. Bartholomew, who had smiled patronizingly and told her she was probably mistaken. Mia continued her story with the determined precision I recognized from my own work, laying out evidence like a prosecutor building a case against an invisible defendant. After being dismissed by her teacher, she had decided to document the vulnerability more thoroughly so the adults would have to take her seriously. What she discovered instead was evidence of systematic theft that had been occurring for at least 2 years. Someone with administrative access was creating ghost accounts, fictional students who existed only in the lunch payment database, and routing federal free lunch subsidies into an external bank account. The amounts were small enough to avoid triggering automatic audits, usually between $15 and $30 per fake student per month, but the scope was enormous. Mia had counted over 300 phantom accounts across the district's 12 schools, representing what she estimated to be more than $100,000 stolen annually from a program designed to feed children who could not afford food. Her voice cracked when she told me she had tried to report it through the official channels, submitting a detailed explanation through the district's anonymous tip line, but nothing had happened. No investigation, no response, no indication that anyone had even read her report. I sat at our kitchen table that night after Mia had finally fallen asleep, staring at the printouts she had made of her findings and feeling my understanding of the situation shift like tectonic plates beneath my feet. The technical work she had done was genuinely impressive, far beyond what I would have expected from someone her age, but it was also clearly the work of someone trying to expose wrongdoing rather than commit it. Her documentation was meticulous. Screenshots of the phantom accounts, transaction logs showing the suspicious transfers, even a timeline correlating the fake student enrollments with the beginning of the current superintendent's tenure. What she had done was technically unauthorized access, I could not deny that, but her intentions had been to help, not harm. The problem was that intentions did not matter much when powerful people felt threatened, and someone at the district clearly felt very threatened by what my daughter had uncovered. I called my brother that night, a corporate attorney named David who specialized in employment law, and asked him if he knew anyone who could help us navigate whatever nightmare was coming. He called me back an hour later with the number of Eleanor Vance, a criminal defense attorney who had made her career defending whistleblowers. Eleanor Vance arrived at our house the next morning at 8:30, carrying a battered leather briefcase and radiating the kind of aggressive competence that made me feel simultaneously reassured and terrified. She was in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, and she listened to Mia's story with an intensity that seemed to unsettle even my preternaturally calm daughter. When Mia finished, Eleanor sat back in her chair and regarded us both with an expression I could not read. She said that in 23 years of legal practice, she had never had a client quite like Mia, and that the situation was both better and worse than I probably understood. The good news was that Mia's documentation was thorough enough to potentially support a criminal investigation into the embezzlement she had discovered. The bad news was that the district would almost certainly try to bury the financial crimes by making an example of the child who had exposed them. Eleanor explained that this was a pattern she had seen before, institutions protecting themselves by attacking the messengers who revealed their failures. She asked if we were prepared to fight, and I looked at my daughter and said we did not have a choice. The following week was a blur of legal meetings, document reviews, and sleepless nights spent staring at ceilings and wondering how my life had gone so sideways so quickly. Eleanor filed an immediate motion to delay the expulsion hearing, citing the need for discovery that would reveal the full context of Mia's alleged unauthorized access. She also reached out to contacts at the state attorney general's office, alerting them to potential financial crimes within the district that warranted investigation. The district's response was swift and brutal. They filed a counter-motion accusing Mia of fabricating evidence to distract from her criminal behavior and leaked carefully selected information to local media that painted my daughter as a dangerous hacker who had potentially compromised thousands of families' personal data. I received the first threatening phone call on Saturday evening, an anonymous voice telling me to drop the whole thing if I knew what was good for my family. I reported it to Officer Carver, who took notes with an expression that suggested he was merely going through the motions. That night, I installed additional security cameras around our house and checked the locks on every window 3 times before trying to sleep. Eleanor called me on Monday morning with news that made my stomach drop into my shoes. The district had hired Raymond Burke, a high-powered attorney known for destroying whistleblowers through aggressive litigation tactics, and they were pursuing civil damages of $300,000 for the alleged security breach. The amount was clearly designed to frighten us into silence, a sum that would bankrupt our family if we lost. Eleanor explained that this was Burke's signature move, using the threat of financial ruin to force settlements that included strict confidentiality agreements. She asked if I wanted to settle, and I told her absolutely not, my voice steadier than I felt. That afternoon, Mia asked me if she had done something wrong, and I had to excuse myself to the bathroom so she would not see me cry. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection, seeing a man who was completely out of his depth but could not afford to show it. My wife would have known exactly how to handle this situation. She had always been the strong one. Without her, I was just improvising. The first break in our case came from an unexpected source, a forensic accountant named Dr. Patricia Lamb, who had been following the story in the news and reached out to Eleanor with an offer to review Mia's financial documentation pro bono. Dr. Lamb had spent 20 years investigating fraud for federal agencies before retiring to academia, and she was precisely the kind of expert witness we needed to validate what my daughter had discovered. She arrived at Eleanor's office on Wednesday afternoon with 2 graduate assistants and enough caffeinated beverages to fuel a small army, and they spent the next 14 hours analyzing the data Mia had collected. When Dr. Lamb emerged the following morning, her expression was grim. She informed us that not only was Mia's analysis correct, but she had actually underestimated the scope of the theft. The phantom account scheme had been operating for at least 4 years, and the total amount embezzled exceeded $400,000. More significantly, Dr. Lamb had traced the external bank account receiving the stolen funds to a shell company whose registered agent was Gerald Frost, the district's IT consultant, and the man who had first accused my daughter of criminal hacking. The revelation about Gerald Frost changed everything, transforming our defensive legal battle into what Eleanor called a potential criminal prosecution goldmine. She immediately contacted her sources at the Attorney General's office with Dr. Lamb's findings, and within 48 hours, we received confirmation that a formal investigation had been opened into financial crimes within the district. The problem was that investigations took time, and Mia's expulsion hearing was scheduled for that Friday. Raymond Burke was pushing forward aggressively, clearly trying to establish my daughter's guilt before the embezzlement investigation could complicate his narrative. Eleanor warned me that the hearing would be brutal, that Burke would try to paint Mia as a dangerous deviant who had violated federal computer crime statutes, and that we needed to be prepared for character assassination on a scale most adults never experienced. I asked her what we could do to fight back, and she smiled for the first time since we had met. She said Mia had done something that most whistleblowers failed to do. She had documented everything, created backups of her backups, and maintained a clear chain of custody for every piece of evidence she had collected. Mia handled the preparation for her hearing with a maturity that simultaneously made me proud and broke my heart in ways I could not articulate. She answered Eleanor's practice questions calmly, walked through her technical process step by step, and never once lost her composure, even when Eleanor deliberately tried to rattle her with aggressive cross-examination techniques. The night before the hearing, she asked me if Mom would have been proud of her, and I had to swallow 3 times before I could answer. I told her that her mother would have been prouder than she had ever been of anything in her life, that standing up for what was right even when powerful people tried to stop you was exactly the kind of person she had always hoped Mia would become. We sat together on the back porch watching fireflies until well past her bedtime, and I told her stories about her mother that I had been saving for when she was older. When I finally carried her to bed, she was already asleep, her face peaceful in a way mine had not been for weeks. I stayed awake until dawn, reviewing documents and praying to whatever might be listening that I could protect my daughter from the storm that was coming. The expulsion hearing took place in the district administration building, a brutalist concrete structure that looked like it had been designed to crush hope and initiative in equal measure. The hearing room was larger than I expected, with tiered seating that was nearly full by the time we arrived. I recognized several faces from the local news crews, as well as parents I knew from Mia's school who had come to watch the proceedings with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. The school board sat at an elevated table at the front of the room, 5 adults who would decide my daughter's educational future based on evidence I increasingly suspected they had already made up their minds about. Raymond Burke sat at a table to our left, flanked by Gerald Frost and Principal Whitmore, all three radiating the smug confidence of people who believed they had already won. Superintendent Marcus Bellwether, a portly man with the oily smile of a used car salesman, presided over the proceedings from a chair that was slightly higher than the board members, a detail that struck me as deeply revealing about his personality. Eleanor had warned me that Burke would try to establish his narrative early and dominate the proceedings through sheer aggression, and she was absolutely correct. His opening statement painted Mia as a calculating criminal who had deliberately infiltrated secure systems to steal personal data for purposes that remained suspiciously unclear but were definitely nefarious. He referenced federal computer crime statutes, cited cases involving adult hackers who had been sentenced to prison time, and suggested that the district was being generous by merely pursuing expulsion rather than criminal prosecution. I watched Mia's face as he spoke, looking for signs of fear or distress, but she maintained the same calm expression she had worn since this nightmare began. When Burke finished, Superintendent Bellwether asked Eleanor if she had an opening statement, and the next words out of her mouth made the entire room go silent. She said that her client was not a criminal, but a whistleblower, and that the district's aggressive prosecution was a deliberate attempt to silence an 11-year-old girl who had discovered financial crimes committed by individuals present in this very room. The reaction to Eleanor's statement was immediate and chaotic. Burke leapt to his feet, objecting. Superintendent Bellwether banged a gavel that seemed to appear from nowhere, and the audience erupted in confused murmuring that took several minutes to quiet. When order was finally restored, Eleanor calmly presented Dr. Lamb's analysis, walking through each element of the embezzlement scheme, while Burke objected continuously, and Superintendent Bellwether sustained every objection he could justify. The board members watched with expressions that gradually shifted from boredom to concern as the evidence accumulated, and I noticed two of them exchanging worried glances when Eleanor mentioned that the state attorney general had opened a formal investigation. Gerald Frost's face had gone from smug to pale over the course of Eleanor's presentation, and when she directly named him as the beneficial owner of the shell company receiving stolen funds, he stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. He accused Eleanor of defamation, threatened to sue everyone in the room, and had to be physically restrained by Burke from approaching our table. Superintendent Bellwether called a recess, and I could see his hands shaking as he gathered his papers. The recess lasted 45 minutes, during which Mia asked me if she could have a juice box, and seemed genuinely more concerned about her blood sugar than the legal drama unfolding around her. Eleanor used the time to take phone calls in the hallway, her expression growing increasingly satisfied with each conversation. When we reconvened, the atmosphere in the room had changed dramatically. Two of the board members were absent, having apparently excused themselves due to unspecified conflicts of interest. Gerald Frost was no longer present, and Burke's confident demeanor had been replaced by the barely controlled panic of a man whose parachute had failed to open. Superintendent Bellwether announced that in light of new information that had come to the board's attention, the proceedings would be suspended pending further review. Eleanor immediately objected, demanding that the expulsion charges be formally dismissed and that Mia's record be cleared of any disciplinary notations. Burke tried to argue for a continuance, but the remaining board members had clearly lost their appetite for this particular fight. After a brief whispered consultation, Bellwether announced that the expulsion hearing was dismissed without prejudice, and that Mia could return to school immediately pending the completion of the ongoing investigation. The aftermath of the hearing moved faster than I could track, with developments unfolding over the following weeks that felt like they belonged in a legal thriller rather than my actual life. Gerald Frost was arrested 3 days later on 12 counts of embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of federal funds. His shell company's bank records revealed not only the lunch program theft, but also a second scheme involving fake vendor invoices that had siphoned an additional $200,000 from the district's maintenance budget. Superintendent Bellwether resigned 4 days after Frost's arrest, citing personal reasons that fooled exactly no one who had been following the story. Principal Whitmore was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into her handling of Mia's original reports, and 3 other district employees were terminated for their roles in suppressing the anonymous tip Mia had submitted months earlier. Raymond Burke withdrew from the case entirely, and the district quietly dropped all civil claims against my family with a settlement that included a written apology and an agreement to pay our legal fees. Eleanor framed the settlement letter and hung it on her office wall, calling it one of the most satisfying victories of her career. The media coverage of Mia's vindication was extensive and largely positive, with local and national outlets running stories about the 11-year-old whistleblower who had exposed hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraud. Several news programs requested interviews, but Eleanor advised us to decline until the criminal proceedings against Frost were complete, and I was grateful for the excuse to protect Mia from the spotlight. What I had not anticipated was the response from the cybersecurity community, which embraced Mia's story as an example of exactly the kind of talent the industry desperately needed. My inbox filled with messages from security professionals praising her technical skills and ethical compass, and several universities reached out about summer programs for gifted young coders. The attention was overwhelming, but Mia handled it with the same unflappable calm she had shown throughout the crisis. When I asked her how she felt about suddenly being famous, she shrugged and said she was just glad the lunch money would go back to feeding kids who needed it. The most surprising development came 3 months after Frost's arrest, when I received a phone call from a woman named Dr. Caroline Ashford, the newly appointed interim superintendent of the school district. She explained that the board had spent the past several weeks conducting a comprehensive review of the district's technology infrastructure, and what they had found was deeply concerning. The security vulnerabilities Mia had identified were just the beginning, a symptom of systematic neglect that had left the district exposed to threats far more serious than internal embezzlement. Dr. Ashford said she had read the technical documentation Mia had prepared, and she was impressed not only by the sophistication of the analysis, but by the ethical framework underlying it. She asked if I would be willing to bring Mia to a meeting to discuss a proposal that she believed would benefit both the district and my daughter. I agreed, more out of curiosity than any expectation that the meeting would lead anywhere productive. We arrived at the district administration building on a Thursday afternoon that felt very different from our last visit. The halls quieter and the atmosphere somehow lighter despite the same brutalist architecture. Dr. Ashford met us in a conference room that had been transformed from a space of conflict into something almost welcoming. With comfortable chairs and a table covered with technical diagrams, I recognized immediately as network topology maps. She was joined by 2 other people, Dr. Richard Yamamoto, a cybersecurity professor from the state university who had been retained to advise the district on infrastructure improvements, and Janet Kimura, the newly hired chief technology officer who had been brought in to rebuild the district's digital systems from the ground up. They greeted Mia with a respect that bordered on deference, and Dr. Yamamoto admitted that he had shown her vulnerability analysis to his graduate students as an example of how to properly document security flaws. Mia blushed at the praise but recovered quickly, asking if they had fixed the back door in the lunch payment system yet. The proposal Dr. Ashford outlined over the next hour was unlike anything I had expected, a formal consulting arrangement that would compensate Mia for her expertise while allowing her to continue her education and maintain appropriate boundaries between her role and adult staff. The district wanted to establish a youth cybersecurity advisory board, with Mia as its founding chair, that would conduct regular security audits of student-facing systems and provide input on technology policies affecting young people. She would be paid a stipend for her time, receive academic credit for her work, and have access to mentorship from Dr. Yamamoto's university program. Janet Kimura explained that Mia's perspective was valuable precisely because she understood how students actually use technology, insights that adult security professionals often lacked. The position would be part-time, with strict limits on hours and responsibilities, and would include regular check-ins with a designated advocate to ensure Mia's well-being was protected. Dr. Ashford acknowledged that this arrangement was unprecedented, but argued that the district's failure to listen to a child had cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars and violated the trust of families who relied on public schools. I looked at Mia and asked her what she thought, fully prepared to decline on her behalf if she showed any hesitation. Instead, she sat up straighter in her chair and asked a series of questions about scope, access, and reporting structures that demonstrated a professional acumen far beyond her years. She wanted to know who would have authority to act on her recommendations, what process would exist for escalating concerns that were initially dismissed, and whether the board would have true independence or be subject to administrative override. Dr. Ashford answered each question directly, and when Mia expressed concern about the dismissal procedures, she offered to include a clause requiring any termination to be reviewed by an external ombudsman. By the end of the meeting, Mia had negotiated modifications to 3 sections of the proposed agreement, and I realized with a mixture of pride and awe that my daughter was a better advocate for herself than most adults I knew. We shook hands on the arrangement, and Dr. Ashford mentioned that the board wanted to hold a public ceremony recognizing Mia's contributions to the district's improvement. Mia said that was fine as long as there was cake. The public recognition ceremony took place at the next school board meeting, in the same room where Mia had faced expulsion charges 3 months earlier. The contrast was almost surreal. Where there had been hostility and accusation, there was now applause and appreciation. Dr. Ashford presented Mia with a certificate of recognition and a ceremonial badge identifying her as the district's first youth cybersecurity consultant, and the remaining board members each offered personal apologies for how the situation had been handled. Janet Kimura announced that the district had already implemented 15 of Mia's security recommendations, and that preliminary assessments showed a 60% reduction in vulnerability exposure across student-facing systems. Dr. Yamamoto spoke about the importance of nurturing young talent and announced that his university would be offering scholarships to support gifted students interested in ethical hacking and cybersecurity careers. When Mia stepped to the podium to offer brief remarks, she looked out at the crowd with an expression I recognized from her mother, that combination of determination and compassion that had defined everything my wife did. Mia's speech lasted less than 2 minutes, but it contained more wisdom than most adults manage in a lifetime of public speaking. She said she was grateful for the opportunity to help make her school district safer, but that she hoped other kids who noticed problems would not have to go through what she went through to be heard. She asked the adults in the room to remember that children see things differently, and that different was not the same as wrong. She said her mom had always told her that doing the right thing was rarely the easy thing, but that it was always worth the difficulty. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting in the loudest applause I had ever heard at a school board meeting. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and did not care who saw. My wife would have been so proud. I was so proud. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Gerald Frost's trial concluded 6 months after his arrest, with guilty verdicts on all 12 counts and a sentence of 8 years in federal prison. The judge specifically cited the harm done to vulnerable children who depended on the lunch program, calling Frost's theft one of the most cynical crimes he had encountered in his decades on the bench. Frost's attorney argued for leniency based on his client's previously clean record, but the judge was unmoved, noting that Frost had compounded his theft by attempting to frame an 11-year-old girl and destroy her future to protect himself. Principal Whitmore was terminated following the internal investigation, which revealed that she had ignored multiple warning signs about Frost's activities because she feared losing the technical support his contract provided. 2 of the former board members who had fled the expulsion hearing faced ethics charges for failing to disclose their financial connections to Frost's shell company, and both were barred from holding public office in the state. The lunch program was restructured with new oversight mechanisms, and the recovered funds were used to expand meal access for students who had previously fallen through the cracks. Mia's first year as youth cybersecurity consultant exceeded everyone's expectations, including mine. She identified and helped remediate 23 additional vulnerabilities in district systems, developed a peer education program teaching students about digital safety, and testified before the state legislature about the importance of including young voices in technology policy discussions. Dr. Yamamoto co-authored a paper with her about age-appropriate approaches to cybersecurity education, which was accepted for presentation at a national conference, and which Mia delivered via video link to an audience of adult professionals who gave her a standing ovation. Janet Kimura told me privately that Mia's insights had fundamentally changed how she approached security architecture, forcing her to consider user perspectives she had previously overlooked. The district's systems, once among the most vulnerable in the state, were now held up as a model for other districts to follow. All because an 11-year-old girl refused to stop speaking up when she saw something wrong. The anniversary of Mia's expulsion hearing fell on a crisp autumn day that reminded me of the afternoon we had buried her mother 3 years earlier. I took the day off work and picked Mia up early from school, driving to the cemetery where my wife rested beneath a simple stone marker. We sat together on the grass, and I told my wife everything that had happened over the past year, all the fear and pride and overwhelming love I felt for the daughter she had given me. Mia placed a small bouquet of purple flowers against the headstone and told her mom about her work with the district, about the friends she had made in Dr. Yamamoto's mentorship program, about the conference presentation that had made her nervous but turned out to be fun. When we finally stood to leave, Mia slipped her hand into mine and said something that made my heart stop. She said Mom would have fought too, and that she was glad I had let her fight instead of making her give up. I squeezed her hand and said her mother would have done exactly what Mia did, which was the right thing regardless of the cost. A few weeks after our cemetery visit, I received an email from Eleanor Vance with a document attached and a subject line that read simply, "Thought you should see this." The attachment was a formal policy recommendation from the State Department of Education, proposing new whistleblower protections for students who reported misconduct within school systems. The document cited Mia's case extensively, using it as a cautionary tale about what happened when institutions prioritized self-protection over the welfare of children. Eleanor's note said the policy had been drafted by a committee that included 2 state legislators who had heard Mia's testimony, and that it was expected to pass during the next legislative session. If implemented, it would create formal procedures for students to report concerns anonymously, require independent investigation of credible allegations, and prohibit retaliation against minors who acted in good faith to expose wrongdoing. My daughter, who had been treated like a criminal for trying to help other children, was now the reason future children would have legal protections she never had. Mia graduates from elementary school next month, ready to start middle school in a district that is fundamentally different from the one she exposed 2 years ago. She still wears the purple cardigan her mother made, though it barely fits now, and she has to be careful not to pop the mismatched buttons. She still rescues earthworms and apologizes to furniture and sleeps with Professor Whiskers tucked under one arm. But there is something different about her too, a confidence that was not there before, the quiet assurance of someone who has been tested and emerged stronger. She talks about wanting to study computer science in college, maybe start a nonprofit helping schools protect themselves from fraud and abuse. When she mentions these plans, I see her mother in every gesture and word, that same fierce determination to make the world better for people who cannot protect themselves. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing from dreams where the hearing went differently, and my daughter was taken from me by a system that valued convenience over truth. I lie in the dark and listen to the house settle around me, the creaks and groans of a home that has seen both tremendous loss and unexpected triumph. Then I remember that Mia is safe, that justice was served, that the people who tried to destroy her are facing consequences while she is building a future brighter than anything I could have imagined. I think about my wife and how much she would have loved watching Mia become the person she is becoming. I think about the other children who will be protected by the policies Mia's courage inspired. And I think about Eleanor Vance's parting words after the settlement was finalized, when she shook my hand and told me that in all her years of practice, she had never been prouder to represent a client. Mia had done something most adults never managed, she said. Mia had told the truth, refused to be silenced, and changed the world. Last week, Mia asked me if I ever regretted letting her fight instead of accepting the settlement and making everything go away. I thought about the question for a long time before answering, because it deserved a serious response. I told her that there were moments when I was terrified, when I wanted to protect her from the storm, even if it meant letting injustice stand. But I also told her that watching her stand up for what was right, even when powerful people tried to crush her, was the proudest experience of my life. She had shown me that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else mattered more. The lunch money mattered more than her comfort. The other children mattered more than her safety. The truth mattered more than the easy path. I told her that her mother would have said the same thing, and that wherever she was watching and cheering louder than anyone. Mia smiled and said she knew, because she could feel Mom with her every time she was scared. Then she asked what was for dinner, and just like that, we were back to normal life, the extraordinary disguised as the ordinary, the way it had always been and would always be. If you made it this far, hit like. You have earned it.